one point. Ireland was actually known for its wolves. It was actually known as Wolfland. It was a bit of a nickname that Ireland was given because we had so many wolves here. Now, I can see the white one there as well, yeah. To the ancient Irish, to the ancient Celts, the land was the most important thing in the world. The fact that they actually called the wolf McTeer, which means son of the land, shows how important they were to the ancient Irish. It's like a form of royalty, almost. That's how important they were. Now, as I said, Ireland was absolutely covered with wolves. We've now got no more wolves left in Ireland. They're now extinct in Ireland, and we're one of the few countries in Europe that doesn't have wild wolves anymore. Now, the beginning of the end of the wolves, unfortunately, came about with Oliver Cromwell. 1652, Cromwell actually was paying a bounty on the head of a wolf. He was paying £6 for every dead adult wolf, 10 shillings for every pup, and he also banned the export of wolfhounds. So he was throwing everything at it. He wanted the wolves gone. Now £6 may not sound like much these days, but in 1652 it's an absolute fortune. And that, combined with the fact that they have got a bit of a reputation for being aggressive and dangerous and all that sort of thing, which I'll talk about in a sec, that means that the wolves were hunted to extinction, and the last wolf was actually shot in Carlow in 1786. Now, as far as how dangerous they are, or not, as the case may be, because most other countries in Europe still do have their wild wolves, over the last 100 years or so there has been some attacks on humans. But for the number of wolves there are versus the number of attacks there have been, it's more than zero, because there has been some, but it's actually too small an amount to measure. It's less than 1%. And of the attacks that have happened, it's found that the wolf either had rabies, so that's a disease that makes them more aggressive, it alters their behaviour, or the wolf was actually being trapped and was defending itself. So they're not the big, bad, dangerous, aggressive animals they're made out to be. It has been shown you're actually more likely to be attacked by a cow or injured by a cow than you are a wild wolf. So, they do get a bad reputation. The other thing that's a bit of a myth, people often ask, who's the big aggressive alpha male? We've got 3 males here. There is a bit of a hierarchy, particularly when it comes to food. If anyone has domestic dogs, if you've got more than one dog, you'll know this. There'll always be one who's a bit bossier than the others, especially when there's food out. So there is that, but not to the extent that they're portrayed in fairy stories and things like that. Because the fact is they're a pack animal. They have to work as a team. If there was an overly aggressive one in the pack, it's not good for teamwork. So rather than that one becoming the boss, that animal actually gets shunned, gets kicked out of the pack. That's where the term lone wolf comes from. So they're very misunderstood. Now, yes, looking at me there now. Now they are carnivores. They eat only meat. Domestic dogs these days would tend to be a little bit more omnivorous. They do sometimes eat vegetables and things like that. These guys eat only meat. A lot of people ask us, when do we feed the wolves? It's not at a set time. Again, we try to encourage natural behaviour. So they're fed fairly randomly. They're fed, sometimes they might be fed half a kilo of food each per day. Sometimes they might be fed a few kilos of food each per day. Sometimes they're not fed anything. They're fasted. Now that might sound cruel, but that's what would happen in the wild. So it's to encourage that natural behaviour. And it's also not just given to them. It's thrown to them, or it might be, sometimes it's buried up in trees or under rocks or things like that. Again, it's all to encourage that natural behaviour. The keepers also do what's called scent trails as well. They'll smear, this is going to sound disgusting, but they smear blood and things up in the trees just to keep them working and to do the scent trails there with that. So now, these wolves are about 5 years old now. In the wild, they would about, last year or so, they may have started to look and to go off and find their own pack. Because they tend to, in the wild, stick with their parents or with their mother till they're about 3 or 4 years old, looking after younger siblings, and then they go off to find their own pack. Now, there has been talk about reintroducing the wolves into Ireland to help control the deer population. Just like I mentioned, careful sweetie, I'm going to make everyone dirty. So, just to control the deer population. As I mentioned over there, we used to have the 5 big mammals, the bear, the wolf, the lynx, the wild boar and the red deer. All of them apart from the red deer have gone. Now that means there is no apex predator in Ireland anymore. The biggest natural predator you have in Ireland now is a badger. Everyone always laughs at that. I don't know. Badgers they can be quite vicious in fairness, but they're not going to bring down a deer. So because of that, a herd animal like a deer, if they haven't got a natural predator, their numbers go up and up and up and up. And in some counties or in some areas, it's more of a problem than others. And when I say a problem, I'm not just saying it's a problem or an inconvenience for farmers or for people or whatever. It's actually a problem for the animals themselves. because there's only so much food that land can produce. And if you've got a herd animal like a deer, they start to overgraze. They start to take away the, you know, as I said, they're eating all the food, so they tend to take away food from other animals. But they don't have a natural predator, they tend to not move on either. Like if there was wolves in the area, they tend to not stick in the same area all the time. So it starts to become a problem for the actual animal. So to try and control that, we do have regular culls. Now the thing is with the cull, it's all about numbers. So it's taking out a certain number of deer every time. It's taking out the sick and the weak and the injured, but it's also taking out the young and the healthy. So what you tend to find happening with a deer cull is the numbers will drop down quite dramatically, but the following year, quite often you find the deer numbers will jump. Because if the head stag gets taken out in the cull, you know, he's the only one that's actually allowed to breed. If he happens to be only allowed to mate, if he happens to be taken out in the cull, the numbers shoot up because it's a free-for-all as far as breeding goes. So they have another cull, and then the numbers drop down again. But more often than not, the cull goes back up. The numbers go back up again after the cull. So it's actually shown not to work. Whereas if you have a natural predator like a wolf, they tend to be targeting the sick and the weak and the injured. They also take out deer that have Lyme disease. They're actually immune to Lyme disease, wolves, so they can take out a deer with Lyme disease and not be affected by it. So they bring the numbers down, but they also keep the herd healthier in the process. So nature does tend to know what it's doing. Humans tend to unbalance things a little bit. Now in Yellowstone National Park, you may have heard about this in the 1990s. They were having a problem with the elk type of deer in Yellowstone. Basically the same situation as here. The wolves have been gone for about 70 years at that point. So the numbers of the herd animals were up, hugely up. So they've reintroduced 14 wolves back into Yellowstone National Park, and what they found was the numbers of the elk came down. Now, both from actual direct hunting, but also from, as I said, they were moving on, which affected how much food was being produced. So the land actually started to regenerate, because there wasn't so many animals there, but they were also moving on regularly as opposed to staying in one area. Because there was more food being produced, that actually started to attract certain animals and birds back. Beavers actually reappeared in the streams and the rivers, and created environments where you could have fish in the streams and the rivers. There's actually a very cool video you can watch on YouTube. It's called How Wolves Changed Rivers, because it's all just a knock-on effect from reintroducing 14 wolves back into Yellowstone. So it's been done very, very successfully, and it's a hugely popular idea here at Wild Island to reintroduce the wolves. Now, having said that, Yellowstone's massive, and it only took 14 wolves to do it, so it might only take a couple of wolves here. But as I mentioned with the lynx, if you pop a wolf, for example, in where there's plenty of deer, that's where they're going to be happy out. They're not going to come down to where the farmers are with the sheep, right? They've got plenty that can keep them happy and fed up where the deer are. So hopefully we will see wolves being reintroduced into Ireland one day. Now, just to give you an idea, I know they're sitting there, it's a little bit hard to tell exactly how big they are because you've got nothing to compare them to. When you're coming in, you might have noticed the paw prints on the path as you're coming in. So they are real paw prints, but that was when they were young. Okay, we've actually got a plaster paw print as you leave out from the gift shop. There's a door where the exit door, and there's a stand of chocolates or sweets there. Just look up to your right. There's a plaster paw print of a wolf. It's about this big. It's actually Fergus's paw print. So just to give you an idea of actually how big they are. So, but they're quite amazing. So these boys won't ever be released into the wild, but they may well be used for breeding. Because they are exactly the type of wolf that used to be here. So. Does anyone have any questions about the wolves? Yes. Yes and no. They have got fresh water as well. This is just a natural pond, so it does sort of drain away when the rain comes. It comes up, it comes up quite high. But they have got fresh water as well, because that's not their only water source. Very good question. You're obsessed with animals fighting, aren't you? Well, again, only if they're threatened. Only if they're competing for the same food source or whatever, but no. They tend to be in different areas. Where in the wild, they tend to sort of, everyone lives in harmony. They tend to not sort of invade each other's spaces too much. So, very good question. What's your question? Yeah, well, they could be. Yeah, they kind of, again, if they weren't competing for food, yeah. So, yeah. They're Arctic foxes, not wolves. So the ones over here, they're foxes. They're a type of fox. So, very good questions. So, yes, what's your wee question, Teddy? What's that, sorry? Your wild wolf is a dog. Well, dogs are, well, they would have been sort of, descended from them, yeah. They're a canine. The fancy word for it is a canine. So, yeah, they're a lot bigger. A lot bigger. Yeah, a lot bigger. So, but that's where they came from originally. Very good question. So.